Hell, we got flying discs today. We call them flying saucers. We've got hovercraft that hover over the water. And so, when you pick up something like that in 1856 or 1898, what are you going to call it? They didn't know. Consider them in the context of what's preceded. After all, Professor W.B. Emery, who had spent most of his life digging in Egypt, did say there's more lying under the sands than has ever been found. There's more yet to be found. They haven't found everything. His conclusion is there's more out there to be found than has been found. Then there's energy sources from sound waves generated by magnetized rods or hammering. Sanskrit books state plainly that aircraft could be driven solely by the power of sound, tunes, and rhythms. Interestingly, in modern automobile tests, an ultrasonic reactor attached to a carburetor almost doubled petrol mileage with very little exhaust gas. The simple gadget is based on a system of harmonic resonance within atomic structure of liquids. How in the hell did ancients know anything about that? Hell, we're just experimenting with it today. We haven't devised any specific technology with ultrasound. We know about it. We're working with it. Kind of like cryogenics, All right, 969 of these records over here. Flight. Maybe next time we'll take a look at ancient weaponry and ancient science, space travel, engineering. There's much more in the book. Remember, it's called Dead Men's Secrets by Jonathan Gray. You can get a copy from bravenewbookstore.com. bravenewbookstore.com. The number's 512-480-2503. Once more, that's 512-480-2503. A 1 in 100 read if I've ever seen one. Now, we've been talking about Dead Men's Secrets. It's a book on 969 records around the world, historical records around the world of events that have occurred in the past, building sites. It covers things like geography and astronomy, cosmology, mathematics, metallurgy, engineering, construction techniques, large-scale construction, things like that are totally unexplainable. Like the Nazca monuments in Peru with the spider that's sticking out there 6 by 4 miles. And then he's got his third leg sticking out there, which is this obscure spider, very rare breed of spider, that you can only watch their breeding technique or their modality with that third leg, which is critical to the reproduction, which is contained in that monument. You can only see it through a microscope. So we got to ask questions, like we're not getting the straight skinny from science. We're not getting the straight skinny and history from our museums, from archaeology, paleontology, and the sciences. And that's because they all have an agenda. They have an evolutionary agenda. And anything that doesn't fit within that evolutionary framework, that evolutionary mindset, is eliminated. And this book exposes 969 ancient records. Now, a lot of times people ask the question, well, where is the evidence? Where is the evidence? This guy's got 969 of these pieces of evidence. Pieces. It's the whole piece of evidence. It's all what we got left. So he has a chapter 9 on vanishing evidence. Let's listen to what happens to the evidence. Consider for a moment the awful possibility that your hometown was forever wiped out. Can you imagine what future generations might find in your hometown? Has it occurred to you that our noblest buildings today are scarcely more than facades supported by thin tendons of steel? Even with no disaster, our main cities would be little more than rubble in 1,000 years. Our motorways would be crumpled pieces of hardness beneath vegetation. Our once complex railway network would be red dust blowing in the wind. And make no mistake about it, very few house chattels would survive the corrosion of time. Generally, paper books cannot last more than a few centuries, hence the need to recopy. Plastics will eventually disintegrate when exposed for long periods outside. The same goes for everything metallic. That's right. Your hairdryer, automobile, carpets would be reduced to dust, along with photographic plates and film. And what's more, all of the iron and steel buildings would rust and crumble to earth. Nothing would be left except a few stone structures downtown and maybe a few statues. Stone is the only indestructible material. It will survive a dead civilization. So isn't it ironic? Nature allows dressed blocks of stone to survive, but not thick iron girders. Probably, there would not be one item left in the suburbs to show that they even existed, except for the odd stone axe head. Now, in the event of a total catastrophe, the survivors would be driven to the countryside to live primitively. They might, for a time, be able to salvage and use certain elements of their civilized technology. Eventually, the last machine would break down, with nobody remembering how to repair it. The transistors, the toasters, the X-ray machines. Even though they are revered today, they would be totally useless to us. To the grandchildren and their descendants, they would become legends. The magic mirror that could see events far away. The metal bird that could fly above the clouds. The room that could move up and down inside of a big house. These would become magical myths of a people whose survival instinct would direct them back into the rapidly encroaching forests. Archaeologists 4,000 years in the future could claim that 20th century man was not yet familiar with iron. If they found cassettes with tapes, these would be meaningless puzzles to them. What do you think of that? Texts, speaking of gigantic cities with houses several hundred feet high, would be classified as myths. So do you begin to see the picture? It is this very situation of meager clues that confronts us in relation to the original super world, the Golden Age, BC. Now, I can think of 4 reasons for this. First of all, most physical remains were wiped out. Numerous ancient cities now lie below ground level. Many are covered by desert sands or have been swallowed by dense jungle, while others still may lie intact under the mile-deep ice of Antarctica. On the other hand, exposed remnants can disappear very fast. Take, for example, the 4,000-year-old ruins in Bolivia. They're called Tiahasco. It's Tiahuanaco. Tiahasco. As recently as the 17th century, there still stood immense walls with massive rivets of silver in the stonework, as well as lifelike statues of men and women in 1,000 animated poses. Even until the last century, travelers could admire the sketch of imposing colonnades. Of these, there is no trace today. The Spaniards, and more recently the Bolivian government, has totally plundered them for the building materials. Now again, many scale replicas of ancient apparatuses probably perished when the Spanish conquistadors melted down all of the gold artifacts that they could find in Central and South America. The scale of destruction over the centuries will never be known. Second, most ancient records have also been destroyed. The destruction of printed records has been much greater than was originally thought. The Great Library of Alexandria once contained 1 million volumes in which the entire science, philosophy, and the mysteries of the ancient world were recorded, including a complete catalog of authors in 120 volumes, with a brief biography of each author. In a single act of vandalism, Julius Caesar destroyed 700,000 priceless scrolls in the Library of Alexandria. In the 7th century, the Arabs completed the wipeout. And do you know how they did it? Well, they used the books as a fuel supply to heat the city's 400 public baths for 6 months. Totally destroyed also were the papyri of the Library of Ptah in Memphis and Carthage. With a library of 500,000 volumes, it was razed in the 17-day fire by the Romans in 146 BC. The Library of Pergamos in Asia Minor with 200,000 volumes likewise perished. And when the famous collection in Athens was wiped out in the 6th century, surprisingly, Homer's writings escaped. There have, in each one of these events, been some writings that have escaped, which tell us what it was that was destroyed, or at least gives us an insight as to how great this destruction was. In the 8th century, Leo Isarus burned 300,000 books in Constantinople. In China, Emperor Tam Sui Huangti issued an edict in 213 BC to destroy innumerable books. Thousands of Druidic scrolls in Autun, France, on philosophy, medicine, astronomy, and other sciences were obliterated by Julius Caesar. Not one survived. In modern times, the Nazis in Germany burned books and destroyed the literature and the culture of millions of people. Much classical literature was systematically destroyed by the Papal Inquisition during the Middle Ages. Spanish conquerors searched out and destroyed the entire Mayan literature except for 4 documents now in a European museum. It was related that Mayan scholars screamed in agony as they saw their life's purpose go up in flames. Some committed suicide. The Council of Lima in 1583 decreed the burning of the knotted cords called the quipus, on which the Incas had recorded their history and that of their predecessors. Now, what a story of carnage. A carnage in which the great depositories of knowledge from the ancient world were destroyed and lost forever. And yet somehow the Indian books escaped. Now, did you know that even of the Greek and Roman literature, less than 1% has survived to come down to us today? So is it any wonder we are ignorant of our early heritage? I agree with Andrew Thomas that we have to depend upon disconnected fragments, casual passages, and meager accounts. Our distant past is a vacuum filled at random with tablets, parchments, statues, paintings, and various artifacts.